the fashioning of the new man. The destruction of the old order, however, and the organization of the new earth are not the only items in the historical program of nihilism. They are not, perhaps, even its most important items. They are but the preparation for a work more significant and more ominous than either, the transformation of man. This was the dream of the pseudo-Nietzscheans, Hitler and Mussolini, of a higher humanity to be forged through a creative violence. This is the mission of our century, said Hitler's propagandist Rosenberg, out of a new life myth to create a new human type 50. We know from Nazi practice what this human type was, and the world would seem to have rejected it as brutal and inhuman. But the mass change in human nature to which Marxism looks is an end that is perhaps not very different. Marx and Engels are unequivocal on this subject, both for the production on a mass scale of this communist consciousness, and for the success of the cause itself. The alteration of men on a mass scale is necessary, an alteration which can only take place in a practical movement, a revolution. This revolution is necessary, therefore, not only because the ruling class cannot be overthrown in any other way, but also because the class overthrowing it can only in a revolution succeed in ridding itself of all the muck of ages, and become fitted to found society anew. 51. Putting aside for the moment the question of what kind of men are to be produced by this process, let us note carefully the means utilized. It is again violence, which is as necessary to the formation of the new man as it is to the building of a new earth. The two, indeed, are intimately connected in the determinist philosophy of Marx, for in revolutionary activity, change of self coincides with the change of circumstances. 52. 50. Mythos 20 Jahrhunderts, p. 22. 51. Marx and Engels, The German Ideology, Part 1, New York, International Publishers, 1947, p. 69. The change of circumstances, and more to the point, the process of changing them through revolutionary violence, transform the revolutionaries themselves. Here Marx and Engels, like their contemporary Nietzsche, and like Lenin and Hitler after them, subscribe to the mystique of violence, seeing a magical change to be wrought in human nature through indulgence of the passions of anger, hatred, resentment, and the will to dominate. In this regard we must make note also of the two world wars, whose violence has helped to destroy forever the old order and the old humanity, rooted in a stable and traditional society, and has had a large role in producing the new uprooted humanity that Marxism idealizes. The 30 years of nihilist war and revolution between 1914 and 1945 have been an ideal breeding ground for the new human type. It is of course no secret to contemporary philosophers and psychologists that man himself is changing in our violent century, under the influence, of course, not only of war and revolution, but also of practically everything else that lays claim to being modern and progressive. We have already cited the most striking forms of nihilist vitalism, whose cumulative effect has been to uproot, disintegrate, and mobilize the individual, to substitute for his normal stability and rootedness a senseless quest for power and movement, and to replace normal human feeling by a nervous excitability. The work of nihilist realism, in practice as in theory, has been parallel and complementary to that of vitalism, a work of standardization, specialization, simplification, mechanization, dehumanization, its effect has been to reduce the individual to the most primitive and basic level, to make him in fact the slave of his environment, the perfect workman in Lenin's worldwide factory. 52. Ibid. p. 204 and 46. These observations are commonplace today, a multitude of volumes has been written about them. Many thinkers are able to see the clear connection between the nihilist philosophy that reduces reality and human nature to the simplest possible terms, and a nihilist practice that similarly reduces the concrete man. Not a few also realize the seriousness and the radicalness of this reduction, even to the extent of seeing in it, as does Eric Kohler, a qualitative change in human nature, the powerful trend toward the disruption and invalidation of the individual, manifestly present in the most diverse currents of modern life: economic, technological, political, scientific, educational, psychic, and artistic, appears so overwhelming that we are induced to see in it a true mutation, a transformation of human nature. 53. But few even of those who realize this much have any real awareness of its profound significance and implications, for these are theological, and so completely outside the scope of any merely empirical analysis, or of a possible remedy, for that must be of the spiritual order. The author just quoted, for example, draws hope from the prospect of a transition into some super-individual form of existence, thus revealing that he has no higher wisdom than that of the spirit of the age, which indeed, as we shall see, has thrown up the ideal of a social Superman. What, more realistically, is this mutation, the new man? He is the rootless man, discontinuous with the past that nihilism has destroyed, the raw material of every demagogue's dream, the free thinker and skeptic, closed only to the truth but open to each new intellectual fashion because he himself has no intellectual foundation, the seeker after some new revelation, ready to believe anything new because true faith has been annihilated in him, the planner and experimenter, worshipping fact because he has abandoned truth, seeing the world as a vast laboratory in which he is free to determine what is possible, the autonomous man, pretending to the humility of only asking his rights, yet full of the pride that expects everything to be given him in a world where nothing is authoritatively forbidden, the man of the moment, without conscience or values and thus at the mercy of the strongest stimulus, the rebel, hating all restraint and authority because he himself is his own and only God, the mass man, this new barbarian, thoroughly reduced and simplified and capable of only the most elementary ideas, yet scornful of anyone who presumes to point out the higher things or the real complexity of life. 53. Eric Kohler, The Tower and the Abyss, New York, George Brasler Incorporated, 1957. Pages 225 to 226. These men are all one man, the man whose fashioning has been the very purpose of nihilism. But mere description cannot do justice to this man. One must see his image. And in fact such an image has quite recently been portrayed. It is the image of contemporary painting and sculpture, that which has arisen, for the most part, since the end of the Second World War, as if to give form to the reality produced by the most concentrated era of nihilism in human history. The human form, it would seem, has been rediscovered in this art. Out of the chaos of total abstraction, identifiable shapes emerge. The result, supposedly, is a new humanism, a return to man that is all the more significant in that unlike so many of the artistic schools of the 20th century, it is not an artificial contrivance whose substance is hidden behind a cloud of irrationalist jargon, but a spontaneous growth that would seem to have deep roots in the soul of contemporary man. In the work, for example, of Alberto Giacometti, Jean Dubuffet, Francis Bacon, Leon Golub, José Luis Cuevas, to take an international sampling 54, there seems to be a genuinely contemporary art that, without abandoning the disorder and freedom of abstraction, turns its attention away from mere escape toward a serious human commitment. 54. Numerous examples of this art may be seen in two books by apologists for it. Peter Sell's New Images of Man, New York, The Museum of Modern Art, 1959. And Selden Rodman, The Insiders, Louisiana State University Press, 1960. But what kind of man is it to which this art has returned? It is certainly not Christian man, man in the image of God, for no modern man can believe in him, nor is it the somewhat diluted man of the old humanism, whom all advanced thinkers regard as discredited and outmoded. It is not even the man disfigured and denatured in the earlier Cubist and Expressionist art of this century. Rather, it begins where that art leaves off, and attempts to enter a new realm, to depict a new man. To the orthodox Christian observer, concerned not with what the avant-garde finds fashionable or sophisticated, but with truth, little reflection should be required to penetrate to the secret of this art. There is no question of man in it at all. It is an art at once subhuman and demonic. It is not man who is the subject of this art, but some lower creature who has emerged, arrived is Giacometti's word for it, from unknown depths. The bodies this creature assumes, and in all its metamorphoses it is always the same creature, are not necessarily distorted violently. Twisted and dismembered as they are often more realistic than the figures of man in earlier modern art. This creature, it is clear, is not the victim of some violent attack, rather, he was born deformed, he is a genuine mutation. One cannot but notice the likeness between some of these figures and photographs of the deformed children born recently to thousands of women who had taken the drug thalidomide during pregnancy, and we have doubtless not seen the last of such monstrous coincidences. Even more revealing than the bodies of these creatures are the faces. It would be too much to say that these faces express hopelessness, that would be to ascribe to them some trace of humanity which they most emphatically lack. They are the faces, rather, of creatures more or less adjusted to the world they know, a world not hostile but entirely alien, not inhuman but a human. 55. 55. The term is Eric Coller's, in OPCIT, p. 15. The anguish and rage and despair of earlier expressionists is here frozen, as it were, and cut off from a world to which they had at least the relation of denial, so as to make a world of their own. Man, in this art, is no longer even a caricature of himself, he is no longer portrayed in the throes of spiritual death, ravaged by the hideous nihilism of our century that attacks, not just the body and soul, but the very idea and nature of man. No, all this has passed, the crisis is over, man is dead. The new art celebrates the birth of a new species. The creature of the lower depths, subhumanity. We have dealt with this art at a length perhaps disproportionate to its intrinsic value, because it offers concrete and unmistakable evidence for him who has eyes to see of a reality which, expressed abstractly, seems frankly incredible. It is easy to dismiss as fantasy. The new humanity foreseen by a Hitler or a Lenin, and even the plans of those quite respectable nihilists among us today who calmly discuss the scientific breeding of a biological Superman, or project. A utopia for new men to be developed by the narrowest modern education and a strict control of the mind, seem remote and only faintly ominous. But confronted with the actual image of a new man, an image brutal and loathsome beyond imagination, and at the same time so unpremeditated, consistent, and widespread in contemporary art, one is caught up short, and the full horror of the contemporary state of man strikes one a blow one is not likely soon to forget.